Slightly to the northeast of Taiwan lie a couple of uninhabited islands. Nothing really lives there except for some birds and fish. Yet these uninhabited islands have been the source for extreme nationalism from China and Japan, asserting that these islands rightfully belong to their own country. So how did this all start? The People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, share the same position on these islands. They call them the Diaoyu Islands and assert that China has had possession of these islands since ancient times. They cite maps showing the islands as the frontier defense against Japanese pirates during the Ming Dynasty. Another common argument made for the Chinese position is the conditions stated in the Potsdam Declaration, which defined the terms of the Japanese surrender in World War II. It said that, quote, Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine, with we referring to the victors of the Second World War, not Japan. The Japanese position is in direct contrast to the Chinese one. They claim that in the 19th century, Japanese fishermen engaged in activities around the uninhabited island. The Meiji government then issued a lease of the island to the Japanese citizen, and the fact that the Japanese government was able to govern this island is proof that they are part of Japan. Japan claims that the islands were not part of Taiwan or the Penghu Islands ceded to Japan by the Qing dynasty during the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, and therefore not returned to China after the Second World War like Taiwan was. Japan also says that both China and Taiwan did not show interest in the islands until the discovery of oil nearby, showing that they had no previous ownership of the islands. These contrasting positions mostly stayed in the shadows, as the Diaoyu Islands simply were too small and unimportant to make much of an impact on policy. However, ever since the aftermath of World War II, tensions between China and Japan have always been high, due to the atrocities committed by the Imperial Army in China and Korea that have yet to be acknowledged by the Japanese government, and in many cases, actively denied through the publishing of nationalist textbooks that portray Japan as the victim. These sentiments boiled over in 2010 when a Japanese Coast Guard ship collided with a Chinese fishing boat near the islands. Protests erupted across mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan as protesters smashed Japanese cars, shouted racist slogans, and burned Japanese flags. In Japan, many anti-Chinese rallies were organized by right-wing groups blasting their own slogans through loudspeakers, some bearing eerily resemblance to the Great East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere meetings during Japan's expansionist period. In 2012, tensions erupted again as the Japanese government proposed to buy the land from its private owner, which then triggered strong responses from Chinese nationalists saying that, quote, no foreign government will buy or sell pieces of China. This time, radical groups from both sides landed at the islands, with both People's Republic of China and Republic of China affiliated groups banding together to stake their claim on the islands. A Japanese radical group responded with a landing of its own, raising the Japanese flag on the islands. Protesters from both sides came out in strong numbers, chanting nationalist slogans and expressing their hatred of the other side. If you ask me, all this fighting is quite silly and useless. The Diaoyu Islands, other than containing extremely minor resources, are of no use to China or Japan, but rather just as a proxy for the ultra-nationalists of each side to vent their hate for one another. It is important that we remember that the peace we currently live in is very fragile, one that not only demands the absence of conflict, but also needs the open cooperation between both sides to preserve it. Let us remember that the people we see in both countries venting their hate for each other do not speak for the majority of the population, and that if we treat a group of people by our impression of their worst, we are no better than those we hate.